Body. Let you get a little bit in on this. I'm going to do some testing tonight. I got a few things I want to talk about. We're going into Labor Day weekend, and there's a whole lot happening. We're on the end of a nearly 8-month period of what many of us would call a great success in the Trump administration. And those of us who voted for him, and frankly, I think the polls show much of the country, notwithstanding these really fake polls that are saying Donald Trump's at the lowest approval rating he's ever been in history. And of course, we get that over and over and over again. Please, I really get weary of the constant blathering of these so-called mainstream media outlets and pollsters who are consistently telling us how badly Donald Trump's doing, how much of an autocrat he is. And none of this is true. And I'm going to go into a few things with you tonight that both are important as far as they go individually. But when you put it all together, you start to see that there is a very real effort to continue the takedown of the United States of America. On one side, you've got Donald Trump truly having quite excellent success. You've seen wars stopped. You see a positive reset in America's trade, and I'll get into that maybe in a little bit more later, but this is a reset that we've needed to have for a long time, because unlike my libertarian-minded friends who say we need free trade, this is tariffs and it's bad. We've lived under a trade regime, a post-World War II trade regime, where it can be rightly said that the entire world, or much of the entire world, has had free trade with us, but we have had little to no free trade with them significantly. This includes places like Europe, Japan. Remember, Japan was our economic nemesis in the late 80s and 1990s. They were at war with us. I mean, worse than what we're doing in the 1990s, where they were flooding our country with vehicles that we didn't get any reciprocity with them to sell our vehicles in their country. So they'd send their vehicles to our country. And by the way, I'm fine with that kind of trade coming in. I want it to come in. It provides, a kind of market where people can choose something that they really want. I'm all for that. But Japan did not do the same thing on the other side with our vehicles, even to this day. I mean, that just changed recently, apparently, with the deal with Japan. So countries like all throughout Europe, where they would put non-trade barriers and trade barriers against our products. In Germany, with our vehicles as well, too. You can't sell an American car. In Germany, you haven't been able to for decades. So that we've got a reset of trade happening with Donald Trump, where the trade, the construct of the trade deals is becoming more and more similar on each side of the trade deal. I've been calling for years for unilateral trade agreements. Forget these multilateral trade agreements where you have these trade organizations that adjudicate trade, or where you make trade deals in regions, organizations like the WTO that adjudicate trade between nations, these internationalist groups that don't have our interest in mind. Of course, China's been a trade situation for the most part where they've gotten all the benefits. Now, we did harm their trade with us up until the late 90s when we gave them most favored nation status. But which brings up another aspect of trade that's getting reset that I think needed to get reset, which is this. We need to be setting trade deals that favor nations that give freedom largely, or some modicum of freedom, or some type of freedom economically and otherwise to their country, to their citizens, excuse me. And we should not give favorable trade deals to nations that don't do that, which is interesting with some of the deals that Donald Trump just made in the Middle East, where even though you still have monarchical regimes in many of those countries, you have had an openness and liberality amongst the people, even within those regimes, that has been increasing over time because of pressure, to the point now where we're apparently going to have an announcement that more and more countries are going to come in on the Abraham Accords. I mean, that's a radical change. So I'm not talking about perfect nations, but where we give trade deals to nations that actually provide some modicum of freedom or some sense of freedom to their citizens. China is not one of those countries. You get people on the east coast of China, some of whom have a certain degree of economic freedom, but you also have a surveillance state. And you've got every person's given a social credit score to determine what freedoms that they're allowed to have. You don't put most favored nation status on organizations like that, much less in these internationalist organizations like the WTO, give them third world status when they're not third world at all. They report that they're number 2 to us in overall gross domestic product. By the way, a number I don't believe. It's certainly very high, but I don't think the numbers are right. But so anyway, we're resetting trade with Donald Trump. As I said, we have freedom breaking out in nations. Trade is resetting to where there's fair advantage on both sides of trade deals with us. And in some cases, Donald Trump has made a better deal for us than other countries, something that has not happened in decades, nearly 80 years. You've got a rescinding of authoritarian, if I may use the word. I'm going to talk about authoritarianism here in a little bit, but authoritarian executive orders that came out of the Biden administration and deep state actions that have built up what is rightly known as the censorship industrial complex, coordinating with businesses to shut down speech. Organizations like the FBI that were calling Catholics potential terrorists while doing nothing about other groups that were literally intimidating American citizens. Like, did they call Antifa a terrorist organization? If Catholics are, then Antifa certainly is. And then you're also seeing in this administration with Donald Trump a drawback of money going to private organizations from whom we get no benefit back in government. In other words, if you pay a defense contractor to build a plane, well, there's a reciprocal benefit there. There's a pay for something specifically that belongs to the U.S. government and used by the U.S. government. When you have money going $2 billion out of the EPA to Stacey Abrams to help people buy appliances, not only is that a socialist construct in that you don't have government money buy appliances for people, you also don't give $2 billion to someone who's not qualified to have it and who gives no direct benefit back to the government in trade for the money paid. We need to entirely get rid of NGO funding in every aspect of the federal government. Donald Trump's drawing that back and changing the paradigm there. We're seeing reform in these federal agencies that are removing lies and obstruction and weaponization against American citizens. Much of this that built up through the Obama administration and went on steroids in the Biden administration. In fact, I don't even know that if Joe Biden knew how much in real terms that happened. I know he knew some of it, but he probably didn't know the full extent of it because he wasn't the one driving it. He had people on his staff driving this. against the will of American people and in an unconstitutional manner. But in all of these positive things that are drawing government back, that are reforming the institutions that we have, in some cases like USAID, getting rid of institutions that are a severe problem, not only in money, waste of money, but in misuse and abuse of power, you're seeing Donald Trump have wins there. Yet, he's being called an authoritarian by many people. So I think, so therefore, some of the things I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to switch gears and talk about specific things, but what I want to open this up with is to give you a sense of the idea that these organizations, these things that have been set up to go against the American people are the authoritarian efforts that have been in place. And we have to continue to oppose those. But because they call Donald Trump an authoritarian, and because there's still enough of a hue and cry in that regard, the lies of it, we're not out of the woods unless we have continued counter-revolutionary, radical efforts undertaken by Donald Trump's administration and hopefully by Congress, which I don't have a lot of hope for, to turn these things back so that when Donald Trump's off the scene in 4 years, we're able to maintain our liberty. I will say this. I'm not convinced that after 4 years, not convinced yet, that after 4 years, we're going to be free from these problems. In fact, we could see a resurgence happen in 2026 if Republicans don't get their act together and go out not just to win elections, but to radically go after every Democrat candidate that they can to take them out at the polls. We have an electoral system, which I hope gets changed before the end of the year. It's crunch time, this effort to redo the census and the efforts in various states to redraw lines, which I'll talk about in a minute. All of that could be helpful to that end, but you got to do far more than that. Having 5 extra seats in Texas doesn't mean for sure you're going to have 5 extra Republican seats. It's probably likely on the numbers, but it's not a given. We do see Democrats having some wins during this off-year election. We're about to see what seems the likelihood that Democrats are going to be elected governor in New Jersey and Virginia because they both have their gubernatorial elections this year. There are chances that John Chitterelli in New Jersey and Winsome Earl Sears in Virginia can get elected. But I see no evidence that either campaign is really, really strong. But yet I see them starting to get a little bit better as November comes around. But those are Democrat wins potentially. When you would imagine a Republican resurgence is coming about, particularly in Virginia, where you're just coming off a 4-year term of a Republican governor. So there is a lot really more at stake. And Republicans have to decide, every one of you who are activists have to decide that we're not just going to win, we're going to win big, we're not going to take prisoners. Obviously, we're doing everything within the law, but we still have Republicans that aren't even willing to do stuff within the law because of the icky ways that these election laws have been put together. And they are icky and they should change, but they haven't yet changed. You have to be prepared for that. So anyway, I want to talk about a few things. I'm not going to spend way too much time, but I hope you'll stick with me because I believe that there are some important things that when you put it all together, particularly the very last thing I'm going to share with you, you're going to find that it's time for winning because those who oppose us are determined to take down Donald Trump and you. They will come back with a vengeance if they can. So I want to talk real quickly about the 3 reasons why the Dems are doomed by PJ Media put this out, and I think it's an interesting article. I'm going to skim kind of through it, but there's some important points here. First of all, no, celebrities really don't die in threes, but it just might apply to the Democrat Party. Each of these stories independently might have generated a headline or two, but altogether they're devastating 1, 2, or 3 death blow against the donkeys. And it happened so quickly, few people notice. So here's the first thing. Reason one, the loss of the Electoral College. Now, this is more long-term, goes into 2032 after the next census. While everyone is focusing on the great gerrymander war of 2025, the New York Times has dropped an anvil on the hopes and dreams of American liberals. Let me switch to that real quick. So the New York Times has talked about how the Electoral College could tilt further from Democrats. You right now have projected additional electoral votes coming to Texas, Florida, Utah, and Idaho. That's on the current census numbers. And they keep these census numbers. They don't do a census every year, but they keep track of changes, and which you can do. And it seems to show that you're going to have 5, 6, 7 more electoral votes going red in these red states. At the same time, New York and California are losing electoral votes. -1 in New York, -3 in California. And of course, Minnesota and Pennsylvania also may lose electoral votes. Now, the Pennsylvania might end up being a GOP loss, because I do think Pennsylvania has trended more Republican. Voter registration's way up in Pennsylvania. Republicans, for the first time in decades, have a registration advantage in Pennsylvania. So maybe that is a net loss, but it's an important one. The Electoral College is swinging away from Democrats. It's also swinging away because there are certain states like Wisconsin and Michigan that are going to always be in play, which had always been in the Democrat column. And this article talks about if those states stay in the Democrat-leaning column, what will happen. Of course, they say the same thing with Pennsylvania. But if you look at 2032, you're looking at a huge advantage right here in the second graph for Republicans in 2032, from a base of 219 Republican electoral votes to a base of 226. Democrats going from 212 to 205. It could get worse than that, frankly. So red states are growing fast, blue states aren't. Birth rates are lower in blue states than red states, although they're down overall in the United States. And what else did they say here? So anyway, you can see the electoral margins go up from 2024 to 2032. I mean, it's happening. So Electoral College is the first reason why Democrats could be losing big. The second one is this. They're on the wrong side of the crime issue. And we're watching that play out so clearly right now. Democrats are recognizing how bad this problem is. You just had Westmore and Maryland invite federal assistance with their crime problem in Baltimore. And you've had the mayor of Washington, D.C., and by the way, we need to go get rid of home rule and go back to Congress running Washington, D.C., but that's a different matter. But you already see the mayor of Washington, D.C. praising Donald Trump for the efforts that have taken place. So they're on the wrong side of the crime issue, and people are upset about it. Early polling data is compelling. This ran in the Hill yesterday. 54% of voters say Trump's actions in D.C. are justified. 54%. That's really bad for Democrats. In fact, they're constantly saying there is no crime, that the numbers are lower than ever. But you forget the fact that we did find out in Washington, D.C., that city police officials were telling people on the front lines not to report crimes in a certain way. Crime's really bad. And here's what's really interesting. You can have the data and the numbers, and they can be right or wrong. For example, last year, Biden fudged employment numbers, so they had a nearly 1 million job adjustment downward after the election. You could have GDP numbers fudged. You could have other economic numbers fudged. But the American people really know what's going on because they sense it right in here in the seat of their heart. And Donald Trump won big. So the foundation is there to go against Democrats in the future. The inertia is against Democrats because they keep touting this and staying on the same side of crime. We'll see if that changes. The two examples I gave in Maryland and Washington, D.C. show that some Democrats understand this ain't going to play so well. There are some kind of testing the waters. Wes Moore's testing the waters on this Maryland governor because he wants to run for president. So he may be testing the waters to see if he's got a lane for himself, which he has in no other way. I mean, the only way he can get a lane for himself is to distinguish from Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris and the others who are thinking about Andy Beshear, who's also running a centrist path. Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, he and Wes Moore are trying to distinguish themselves, trying to find a lane that's different from everyone else. I mean, Gavin Newsom is actually digging a hole for himself. He's stirring up his base, but that's it. That's all that's happening. So let's go to the third thing. Actually fighting fire with fire. So if gerrymandering is so bad and so undemocratic, why did Democrats do it? Trump received 1.25 million votes in Massachusetts, winning 36% of the vote, but there are no Republican members of the House. Trump received 737,000 votes in Connecticut, 42% of the vote, no Republicans in the House. Trump received 423,000 votes in New Mexico, 46% of the vote, no Republican House seats. Trump received 2.49 million votes in Illinois, 43.5% of the vote, but there are only 3 Republicans out of 17 congressmen. In New York, 43% of the vote, and there are only 7 of 26 members of the House that are Republican. And he's 38.3% of the vote in California, and there are only 9 Republicans, and now Gavin Newsom is going to make it worse. They're doubling down on this gerrymandering thing. Not only is it not going to work for them, because Republicans have far more opportunities, but you've also got the fact that the American people see the game that's being played. They are losing this gerrymandering argument battle. I mean, it was a stupid mistake for these Texas Republicans to run to Illinois, which is literally and by far the most gerrymandered state in the nation. There are 8, maybe arguably 9 congressional districts out of those 17 that draw right in. I'll have the map available here, but draw right into Cook County and Chicago. There are the 1st and the 2nd district, both tie in to southern Cook County and southern Chicago, south side of Chicago. And they go all the way down almost to Carbondale, Illinois, which is halfway down the state. If you know Illinois geography, Chicago's almost as far north as you can get, and those districts go halfway down the state. All of the population is in districts 1 and 2 is in Cook County, and yet it goes all the way down the state, giving these other Republican voters no chance to get a Republican representative. That's the worst gerrymander by far in the country. There's a lot of really bad ones. That's the worst. Okay, so those 3 things really are showing that Democrats have a real problem in the future. They know it's a problem, and they're going to continue to fight for advantages in how elections are set up instead of finding advantages by appealing to the American people. They are not attempting to appeal to the American people. They are only fighting these battles to keep election laws in stasis. I'm going to get into that more deeply here in just a little bit. Let's move on to the next thing. This is a great little debate taking place. Donald Trump just put out on True Social yesterday, I think it was. Today's Thursday, 28th of August, 2025. George Soros and his wonderful radical left son should be charged with RICO because of their support of violent protests and much more all throughout the United States. We're not going to allow these lunatics to rip apart America anymore, never giving it so much as a chance to breathe and be free. Soros and his group of psychopaths have caused great damage to our country. That includes his crazy West Coast friends. Be careful. We're watching you. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Oh, I love the thank you for your attention to this matter. I'm just going to go briefly on this real quick. There's no doubt, whether on a criminal basis or not, George Soros has been colluding to take over the United States of America out of the hands of voters and put it into the hands of a DC elite. That has been the case for years. Let me tell you some of the areas that he's been working to make this happen. First of all, let me go back to a quick bit of history. Remember, George Soros is famous for cornering the British pound back in the 1980s. It's how he became a billionaire. And he had worked political chaos operations in the UK at the same time that he was making bets against the pound. And eventually he won that battle. He literally took down a currency and won big on it. So why is that important? Because George Soros has one methodology to make money, and it's not finding good companies to invest in. And he does some of that. That's part of his hedge fund and what he does. But going after those good companies also includes finding the hedge that will allow him to either go short against a stock or a company or an asset by creating chaos in that asset to try and gain the most advantage from it. So he works real hard to pull the levers of power in such that he can move them hard against something or pull it back for a little bit just to give him enough time to make the trade deals to rake the money in. Now, I think George Soros is very political, and every Trump supporter is convinced of that. And I think there's some truth to his political socialism. That is literally where he's at. But do not be deceived. George Soros is about making money. He has political proclivities. But honestly, in many ways, those political proclivities are tied to what he's attempting to do to make money for himself and his investors. He's always played this political game. He thrives on chaos. That's why the main reason he gets involved in political activities. Because political activism, organized well enough with enough money behind it, can wreak chaos into societies and into governments, thus giving him an opportunity to hedge his bets against those governments or those companies that he takes on. This is what, in part, why he's interested in DEI. He bets against companies losing their margins because they get distracted by things that don't actually allow them to succeed as a company. Listen, you will notice, or you may have noticed, or maybe not have noticed, about 15 years ago, you started seeing a consistent flow of articles. And this is while Milton Friedman was still alive. You saw a consistent roll of articles right about the time before his death and shortly thereafter, saying that his shareholder value theory was wrong. His shareholder value theory says everything that businesses do, the way they manage their business, the way they capitalize what they do and how they seek to grow, should always be focused on shareholder value, giving shareholders a return on their investment. That's the purpose and goal of companies in a free market society. DEI and ESG and these other ideas go against that. So you saw this retrenching of the argument against Milton Friedman's shareholder value theory. began the discussions that led up to DEI and ESG gaining prominence, all the way to the point that in the Biden administration, the Securities and Exchange Commission put leverage on companies to implement these policies. Neither DEI or ESG make companies strong on their books. They distract from activities within a company that make it succeed. The argument for DEI has always been getting rid of racial preference in businesses. Frankly, even though I'm sure that there are some people, probably mostly small businesses, that maybe ever have some idea, well, I don't want a black person working here. The chances of that are incredibly slim. Or the idea of, yeah, I don't know if I want a black person running this company. All those things that are associated with our Jim Crow past and the Jim Crow South in particular. Those ideas are so not in the heart and thinking of the American people at this stage in our history. When Barack Obama came on the scene, there certainly, 6,000 years of recorded human history proves the moral depravity of man. But those ideas have been shunned in this country for a long period of time. Now, I do get concerned because you see some people pushing back so hard because of this assault on white people, which is a reverse racism, that you could see a slingshot go the other way. But if that happens, it's because George Soros and others pressed this DEI idea. Frankly, I don't think it's ultimately going to happen. But Donald Trump is right to point this out because this is a serious, serious issue. And he should be investigating George Soros for bad behavior. And you definitely need to look at a RICO situation. One example of why that's important is take a look at the LA riots. You find out that the organizations that started those LA riots under the No Kings banner, those organizations were funded by the California state government to the tune of millions. One organization got $32 million from state and local governments in California. But that same organization received $500,000 from, of all places, the Biden Department of Homeland Security. Now listen, activist organizations should never get a dime from the American people. There should be no tax money going to organizations like that. As I said earlier, you build a fighter jet, we pay you for the fighter jet from the taxes, and the government takes possession of it. That sort of an exchange with private companies is and should be continued, is normal and should be continued. But if it's just some activist organization to help form democracy and make people free, if you see any desire to spend money for that purpose, there's only one reason that money's being spent, and that is to fulfill the political favor of some politician who made that pay happen. Watch that in the reconciliation bills coming up in Congress and see if even Republicans are giving money to these sorts of organizations. That should be a no-no. Donald Trump's right to go after George Soros because he uses organizations like that and financial arrangements out of the federal government like that to fund activist groups that Soros is also funding so that they can get things done. I applaud the courage of Donald Trump going after this. He's probably the only guy in the world right now that could be, in the United States, that could be president and go after Soros. Because Soros plays dirty. And his son Alexander, he doesn't have the same attitude as his dad in terms of, I'm just trying to make money. He's out to change the political environment. He is a strong political activist. He's made it very clear himself. This Hydra needs to be taken down. Okay, let's go on to the next thing. I got to go quicker now because I'm taking up a lot of your time. I just was really impressed by this video by John Stossel related to charter schools. I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's 7 minutes long. I'm just going to play a few minutes here, and then I've got a few comments.
from one charter school take advanced placement exams. They had to rent space at a convention center. Kids who attend rich suburban schools sometimes pay $500 an hour for tutoring for tests. But these kids can't afford that. They're mostly from low-income families. They attend a city charter chain, yet they succeed.
Outperforming their peers by a landslide.
On math tests, Success Academy kids outperform every school in New York State. Other charters are in blue on this graph, government-run schools in gray. Success kids also outperform other kids in English.
That is redefining American public education.
LeMay DeYoung is Success Academy's chief schooling officer.
Our Black and Hispanic students outperformed their peers by double, triple % in their math.
By peers, you include the rich kids in the suburbs?
Yes.
But school is boring.
No!
When I first checked out this charter, I was amazed that these kids enjoyed school, saying subjects like reading were
Rockin' awesome.
So you guys look forward to going to school in the morning?
Yeah.
It's why lots of parents want to get their kids into Success Academy. I watch them line up, hoping to get their kids in.
This line goes on and on forever. Goes around the block. What do you do when you have thousands of people and just a few hundred slots? They hold a lottery.
The winners are happy. Sadly, there are many more losers.
That means my name will come next time.
Yeah, next year. Not today.
That's so sad. Today, the lottery's done electronically, so we don't get to see the thousands of kids and parents who cry in disappointment. The chain wants to offer its magic to more kids, but they aren't allowed to.
So I'm going to stop this there. Think about this. This is another area where what is rightly described the commanding heights of culture are being controlled by those who do not have your interests in mind. And frankly, it's an overall authoritarian push. The teachers' unions have conspired with government school districts all over the country to try to shut down efforts like charter schools, certainly to shut down private schools, to shut down voucher programs that would allow parents to choose where they're going to send their kids to school. This is a serious, serious problem because, as you can see right here, kids and parents are in tears over losing the opportunity to educate their children. This is an assault on children. I've said for many years that the last bastion of true Jim Crow racism is inner city public schools. They consign brilliant, capable, young kids in minority families, Black and Hispanic and other families. They are shut out of the system from their kids getting an opportunity to do better than them. And when you combine that with the fact that so many of these families are consigned to welfare because they don't have job opportunities, or they're so used to the welfare system that it's almost impossible for them to get off easily, you can see that there's a tremendous destruction on the family. It's a travesty. Let's move on to the next thing. I want to see if I can find this here. Oh, yeah. Okay, there we go. Hold on. One of the bastions of freedom to try to change the course of government has been the House Freedom Caucus. I had the privilege of being involved with these guys from when I worked on Capitol Hill beginning in 2011. And I worked there for 4 years, that stint, and then I left and came back again for a few more years. Freedom Caucus was founded to try to counter the successful attempt, I would say, by John Boehner and the Republican establishment to destroy the Tea Party movement. I don't know if you know this, but the Tea Party went by the wayside in part because the Obama administration was weaponizing the IRS against organizations that wanted to start up and organize and raise money to build a broader Tea Party base. One of the great travesties of that time is that Barack Obama actually was very successful at squashing the Tea Party movement organizationally. But an even worse factor is John Boehner and the Republican establishment that did not want to reduce government in the manner that Donald Trump is now. And they co-opted the 64 new members that came in. And by the time things shook out over the first few months, there were really only about 24, 25, 26 members that were willing to advance the Tea Party agenda. Now, and they have been having decent success over the years. In fact, in this article by the Wall Street Journal, they're slamming on the House Freedom Caucus because they've become part of the DC swamp culture, a once great newspaper gone bad. Let me just read a little bit of this. House Freedom Caucus is no longer the most feared group of GOP lawmakers on Capitol Hill, and headed into the next fight with fellow Republicans over keeping the government funded this fall, members say they want to help make a deal not tear one apart. The group of roughly 30 lawmakers, there's no official list, has included many of the most outspoken dissidents in President Trump's second term, drawing putative red lines on major legislation ranging from Trump's big beautiful bill, which they call the tax law, to a recent, and by the way, they call it big beautiful tax law because they also admit that cuts didn't happen. But anyway, let me go on. To a recent crypto proposal. But when it comes to time to vote, caucus members have lined up with Trump and party leaders and torpedoing bills, not torpedoing bills like in past years. Okay, let's look at this. Donald Trump made very good deals with these guys on the big beautiful bill. There was some major parts added to the big beautiful bill that are very House Freedom Caucus-y. And I have to tell you, I was relatively supportive of the bill because of some of those things that got into it. But I consistently called out the fact that it was a total missed opportunity. I made this very clear. The bill was a huge missed opportunity for cutting government spending. But there was Medicaid reform. There was expensing for small businesses for 5 years, immediate expensing of capital expenditure of trying to build out the company, which will have a huge effect on the economy moving forward. It's one of those things that's kind of in the underground no one's talking about. It's going to be huge. It kept the Trump tax cuts in place. And by the way, keeping the Trump tax cuts in place didn't cost anything. We already had the Trump tax cuts. When they scored them costing $4 trillion, all that meant was stealing $4 trillion by letting those Trump tax cuts expire. And they were made permanent. So any future Congress that wants to raise taxes actually has to vote for it. They don't have to wait for it to expire like the Bush tax cuts expired in 2012. That's never going to happen with the Trump tax cuts. That was a huge, big win. All of those things happened because of the House Freedom Caucus. Mike Johnson had to make the deals because of the House Freedom Caucus. So the issues stated here of the supposed demise of the House Freedom Caucus, bad news. Next article. Gerrymandering is controversial, but the alternative is much worse. My friend Brian Darling wrote this. Let me read a couple quick excerpts out of it. Think about it this way. If the solution to states redrawing congressional districts was for the federal government to step in and stop changes, the Constitution would be violated and federalism would be diminished. We live in the republic contemplated by our founders with less power in the hands of the federal government than most other nations. Allowing the party in power in D.C. to dictate what states can and cannot do violates the very idea of the ultimate power residing with the people. Let me read on, and I'll comment on that. On August 22nd, the New York Times editorial board wrote President Trump, quote, has urged his party state legislators and governors to redraw congressional districts to maximize the number of Republican seats. They complained that, quote, Mr. Trump's gerrymandering campaign is a cynical attempt to undermine the will of voters, and the goal is blatant. Allow Republicans to retain control of Congress regardless of a majority opinion. By the way, it's not voters who are undermined. It's the deep state. There's no mention in this partisan screed of the decades Democrats spent undermining the will of voters. Nothing about New York Democrats' attempt as recently as last year to throw out the work of their nonpartisan redistricting commission. They were blocked by their own state courts, nor of the faux nonpartisan system that has already left California Republicans with only 9 out of the state's 52 seats. Take note that Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom wants to put 5 more seats into Democrat column. Okay, so what's happening here? If there is any move by federal courts or anyone in Congress to stop the drawing of districts efforts that are taking place right now, we don't have a constitution anymore. Because what that would literally be is people in Washington, D.C. dictating to the states how they can send representatives to control what's going on in Washington, D.C. Do you see this cycle here? And so much of government right now is exactly that sort of cycle. Well, we want to enhance education, so we're going to throw billions of dollars into state education agencies. By the way, you better do things our way, like Common Core, and just name the system and structure they put in. No Child Left Behind. And we're going to tell you how to run your things with the money we give. I think that's a constitutional violation. There's no constitutional authority for education money to be spent from Washington, D.C., given to the states. There's no authority in the Constitution anywhere. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, you will not find the authority in that list of authorities that Congress is given, which is very limited, and if followed, would really lead to the reduction of about 70% of the federal budget as it exists right now. And by the way, the only reason we were able to do that is because of the fact that in 1913 we created the Federal Reserve, which can print money and expand the currency so that the government can spend more money, so that they can print more money to spend more money, so that they can go to wars, and then they can give you social programs so that they can get reelected in Washington, D.C. That's the scam. The purpose for Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution was to stop that kind of scam from happening. In that sense, we don't have a constitutional republic right now. If you're wondering what the problem with Washington, D.C. is, it's that Washington, D.C. even matters to you much in your life. It should only matter to you in times of war, when our country's being invaded, and it should only matter to you in terms of some aspects of infrastructure, like rivers that run through multiple states, that there really is a jurisdiction for the federal government to be helpful and do things in cooperation with the states. That's it. That's the only place that it should matter with you. Just about everything else you think of that comes out of the federal government, it's not authorized to do. If we had this sort of thing inject itself into our system, and trust me, Democrats want to do this because they've already been doing it in our elections right now. In many ways, like in states like California, there really is not an election that happens in California. It's not really an election process. They concede a few districts to Republicans to make them feel good. And by the way, we figured out you don't feel good, so we're going to take more away from you now, Gavin Newsom says. They don't even run elections in California. One of the reasons there's so many Democrat seats, by the way, is not just because, and this is at the state legislative level too, is not just because of the way they draw the districts alone. That is part of it. The other part of it is they have jungle primaries. There are never two competing parties working against each other in a general election in all the districts around there, because in very Democrat districts, you can't get a Republican to run because it's going to be the top 2 Democrats, because the top 2 people in the primaries, whatever party they are the ones that are running against each other. It's bad enough we got a two-party system that third parties can't break in and have some impact. That's bad enough. I'm not a big fan of third parties, to be candid with you, because in the current system, they don't fail, because the system in every other state that doesn't have jungle primaries still works against third parties by design. I mean, it's actually in the laws of the states. But that's one other matter. That's something actually we could have a free society and just have to struggle through. You can't struggle through a state that has ultimate control over the entire election process in that state. Democrats run the state of California. Yes, you Republicans can have a few things. And we can't take all, you know, we can't draw the lines to take every Republican out so that Republicans can't win in a district. But we're going to try. They want to duplicate what's happening in California across the country. And this effort to potentially have people in the federal government determine whether you can gerrymander your state, that's a big problem. There's another problem. Independent commissions really do sound like a good idea. In fact, I think many people that push for independent commissions have good intentions. I think they want to try to get away from the political back and forth that takes place with drawing lines. The problem is it's a far worse system than the one we have with partisan efforts to draw lines. I mean, at least in a legislative body, even if Republicans control the legislature, for example, or if Democrats control the legislature, you've got people of the opposite party that can still have some input and make it difficult. So, because there's not always unanimity on either side of the aisle. So if your party's the majority, it's not always easy to keep those people in line. And frankly, they can be intimidated to inject their idea into the drawing of the lines. And so you've got a process where there is real debate in partisan gerrymandering. What happens, particularly in California, I mean, they're bypassing the commission that's already stacked with Democrats and Democrat independents, so-called, that they had a commission system to draw their lines that Democrats successfully stacked in their favor. That becomes far worse over time. Partisan drawing of lines is the most useful way for us to do it, even with its faults. It's far better than the alternative. And it's definitely far better than the federal government doing it, because then you don't have any representative government. This is something that is sacrosanct only for the states to decide. Congress can regulate to some degree how elections are run. They can make it a one-day election. They could get rid of multi-day elections. They can get rid of unsolicited mail ballots. They can do some of these things. It says it in Article 1, Section 4, Clause 2 of the Constitution. There is some regulatory authority on how elections are run. There is no authority anywhere in the Constitution for them to draw the lines. None whatsoever. And should they be able to, the game's over. Let's go on to the next thing. And this is the pièce de résistance. I want to go quickly over a little video. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, I don't think. Norm Eisen is a name you may or may not have heard of. If you want to know why our elections are so screwed up right now, it's because Democrats have used Norm Eisen, a pretty smart lawyer, to build teams to change how our elections are run to favor Democrats. Some of the key things he's done is he's been involved a lot in promoting unsolicited mail ballots. He's been the major reason why election rolls all over the country are so bad, where people have moved out of state and they stay on the rolls for years and should be immediately taken off. If you want to know why these things are such a problem, and of course, he was highly involved in the 2020 elections. By the way, he's about to describe something they did after January 6, 2021. He was highly active beforehand, working, frankly, with Republicans in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to undermine Donald Trump in 2020. And that's just absolutely a fact. All you got to do is read a Time magazine article that goes through the whole thing. But I want you to hear what Norm Eisen says, because it's far worse than what I just described. There's a lot more going to this, and he admits it right here on video. Take a listen.
My organization, the State Democracy Defenders Fund, we were born out of the success in stopping the attempted coup of 2020.
Let's just be real clear here. He's going to stick with the language, coup. It was not a coup. I'm just going to say no coup happened on January 6th. There are a few bad things that took place. That is for certain. But it was not anything but a coup. And he's a lawyer. He knows better. There was no legal insurrection because insurrection was never charged against anyone. And you can get a jury to charge anybody for anything. No insurrection charge. Therefore, no coup charge because a coup also implies the use of arms. And it's a lie to say that people were carrying guns all around the Capitol. They weren't. Anyway, let's go on.
And I kind of got the people who I admired the most. I worked representing multiple parties fighting in court, but also in the court of public opinion in that unsuccessful effort to reverse the legitimate outcome of the 2020 election. I got the best people together who I thought were the toughest, the smartest, and who won a lot in 2020. And we added in building our organization. We started this immediately after. This work started on January 7th, this new work, 2021.
And I just want to interject here. So keep in mind, his team was already put together. They were already operating in 2020. He's already obfuscating the situation as he speaks. Because this same team that he says he put together on January 7th was already active throughout all of 2020, even as far back as 2019 and 2018, when they were working to change election processes. Two of his efforts violated the federal Constitution. In Georgia, there was a consent decree made between Brad Raffensperger and Stacey Abrams to change the elections. It's what ultimately ushered in a broad use of Dominion voting machines in Georgia. And listen, you be for or against or think what you want about Dominion machines. I think we got to get rid of touch screens. I'm not saying that Dominion stole the election. I'm always willing to hear those arguments, but I'm not making that claim. What I am saying is that touchscreen machines are potentially fraught with just mere error that can move elections. And I'm talking about, did you really touch at the right place? And how can you verify that? That's why you need paper ballots, or as we used to use as well in the old days, lever machines that are mechanical and can't be fudged. You can actually look at it before you pull that lever back and open the curtain. You can validate everything you did. You can't do that with election machines. Anyway, he was involved with those efforts. Pennsylvania as well changed their rules. And without the consent of the legislature, because Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution says that legislators choose how electors are chosen. Those two states, and I believe the same thing the same thing happened in Wisconsin and Nevada as well, that these laws were changed without the authorization of the legislature. And in part because as COVID was ramping up, the legislative sessions, either states weren't in session because they weren't in session that year, or they were just beginning or ending their sessions, so there was no time to change it. So, and they didn't call them back because of COVID. So anyway, this is how these things happen. Let's move on.
Right after the coup failed, when the violent insurrection that Trump inspired on January 6th
he didn't. He said go peacefully and patriotically.
Was defeated. I started combining the most successful coup fighters that I came across in my work in 2020 with experts who had helped study or defeat autocracy internationally.
Keep in mind, he brought in an internationalist effort to overtake this coup by Donald Trump. Think about that for a second. He went to people that he knew had taken down leaders in other countries. He's going to flesh this out a little bit, and I got more to say.
So we went to places over the intervening years like Hungary and Turkey, where the effort to oust an autocrat failed. Why did it fail? What did they fail to do?
Turkey does have an autocrat, Hungary never did. That was always the claim.
But we also looked at places like Poland, Brazil, Czech Republic, the country where I served as ambassador.
And those three countries had certainly what are described as populist leaders who were actually retrenching government out of its center of power.
Where there were successful ousters in recent years of autocratic regimes.
None of those were autocratic regimes, except maybe you could make the argument Turkey was. That's it. These were not autocrats. These were Republicans, so to speak. I use a small r Republican.
And we came together over that 4-year period with a plan to defeat autocracy. It's not.
So they defeated autocracy. And remember, he keeps calling it autocracy. By the way, autocracy means one person rule. In none of these countries, and I would say it's really hard to say Erdogan in Turkey was autocratic in the technical sense. He certainly is, fashions himself as a Putin-esque dictator, but is he autocratic? Maybe close, possibly, but none of these other countries are that way.
Just litigation. Litigation is very important in our peaceful, lawful, vigorous effort. Think of litigation, the courts, as the first guardrail. Donald Trump has been loudly banging into that guardrail in this over 150 cases where we and others have had so many wins. Because we've been winning, that guardrail is holding. But that loud banging is waking up two other barriers that lie, two other guardrails that lie on the other side of litigation. The next one is political leadership, where we've seen in the United States that elected officials, mostly at the state levels, like the state AGs, they've been going to court, but they've been talking, holding town halls, speaking to the American people. Now,
did you notice this? He admits that the Soros AGs are a key part of this process. Now, we talk about them, but have you ever considered it in quite this way? The legal guardrails that go directly against his political opponents, and then the fake efforts of putting in people, particularly like Letitia James, who said she was going to take down Donald Trump publicly and still got elected, and by the way, broke every rule in doing so, and then ultimately broke the actual rules. These people have a plan, folks. Listen further.
Congress is starting to get in the act, so that's a second layer of protection. The third, and maybe the most important, and this is the difference, this is why autocracy was defeated in Poland and why it is still there down the block in Hungary, the people. When you awaken the American people, which that loud banging in the first guardrail has done, do you know that there's twice as many protests in 2025 as there were in 2021? 2021 was covered as the era of big protests against Donald Trump. There's actually been more in 2025. Another thing we've done is we've incubated an independent publication at Democracy Defenders. It's called The Contrarian. Jen Rubin quit the Washington.
Okay, I'm going to stop right there because you could see what's going on. Let's take note of what we have just seen discussed. Do you understand it takes a lot of money to do these things? It takes a lot of effort. And this is an internationalist effort. Like Norm Eisen is not just involved in the United States. They have built a large structure internationally to coordinate this three-rail system that he just described to attempt to take down what he calls autocrats. And this is very Orwellian because they're not autocrats. In every case, whether it's Viktor Orban in Hungary, whether it's the former Polish leader, whether it's Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil and a few other countries that he mentioned, every one of those leaders that they took down are the opposite of autocratic. They've been returning power back to the people, particularly Donald Trump, even with where you might disagree with this or that thing that he's attempted to do. And I have, for example, big disagreement with the 10% stake in Intel. There's no reason for American government to have a stake in other private institutions. But that said, let's put that aside. That's not particularly autocratic. I think it's wrong, and I think it's the wrong thing to do, and it should be opposed. But that's not autocratic. You have so much more: a destruction of the centralized censorship state. Part of that third guardrail that he talked about is the shutting down of opposition speech. That's happening in Brazil big time, much worse here than the United States. Look at what's happening in the UK. You think he didn't mention it, but you think he's not operating in Europe as well to do this very same things? He absolutely is, both because obviously he is in Hungary and Poland and these places, but he's doing it in the larger countries of Europe as well because he's utilizing lawyers and teams of other people to implement these things in the smaller European countries. This is an internationalist effort to take down liberty. Like, if you think the World Economic Forum going off the side has saved us, it hasn't at all. Norm Eisen and people connected with him are still doing it. And all this is being funded by people like George Soros and other billionaires who are invested in keeping people like Donald Trump from ever having power. They're about to attempt to throw Jair Bolsonaro in prison in Brazil. The Supreme Court there has gone past its authority to charge him with an attempted coup when he wasn't even in the country when the so-called coup happened, their January 8th incident in 2023, which they said was the same thing as our January 6th incident in 2021. Neither of which were coups, both of which had Norm Eisen and later on Joe Biden and the FBI and the CIA under his direction meddling in Brazil's election. Like, this is a highly connected group of people who are attempting to destroy what we know as free government, what we know as popular sovereignty, which means the people rule. They don't want the people ruling. This is an organizational effort to ensconce power in elites who work with the government to maintain that power. And I would argue this is literally fascist. I mean this in the technical sense. When you look at what happened in Mussolini's fascist government, he started with popular uprisings. He got some political power in the northern part of Italy. He created what they were called black shirts, who would intimidate corporations and take money from them if they wanted to not be beaten up on. If anyone spoke out, they were physically threatened and or in some cases harmed. And then he ultimately took control of all of Italy by intimidating Emmanuel III, the then king of that was over all of the Italian mini-states. That's where Italian unity came in, because Mussolini ended up, in a gentle way, deposing Emmanuel III. And then he ensconced a fascist government. Italy has recovered, thankfully, from that. But this is literally fascism, working with corporations, gaining government power, manipulating voting processes. This is fascist. But whatever you want to call it, this is a coordinated effort to undermine Republican forms of government, free governments anywhere. This is not about so-called democracy. This is the implementation of a socialist, fascist, communist, whatever you want to call it, type of rule. This is about obtaining power for the powerful and taking it away from people who don't have that same authority. This is what's at stake. This is why what Donald Trump is doing is so consequential, and hopefully can radically transform what's been taking place so that we can move on further. But what has to happen in the meantime is that people on the right side of the aisle, the MAGA base as well as MAGA politicians, need to make sure to counter these efforts. This is why when you go to Donald Trump's post where he said that he is watching George Soros, if I can make this happen, sorry. That's why this post right here is so important. Because if Donald Trump can take this down successfully in the courts, then we can establish an opportunity to do what I think rightly ought to be done. That these sorts of coordinated efforts, Norm Eisen is admitting that they're an internationalist in nature and not just American in nature. We got to get to that aspect of it too. If we can get to that, maybe we can save our country. If not, folks, I hate to tell you this, but it is a real treasure to have Donald Trump in power right now to stop this form of supposed autocracy for now. The question is, in the interim here, during these 4 years, you're going to have to build up your courage to deal with it. You're going to have to learn to put things in place in your community to stop it. And then you're going to have to go from there and get active in 2026 to test the plan, to work it, to learn from it, and then be ready for 2028. So this war is not over. I wish it were. I wish I could tell you that there's relief. There's not. There's temporary relief. But you need to use this time of relief to strengthen yourself, to reorient your mind as to what's happening, to study what's going on. And I've tried to give you a few tools to start with that right now. And then decide to take action thereafter. It's the only way we can save our country. With that, thank you for taking a little time with me tonight. I appreciate it. I'm grateful for those of you who follow me and listen to me. Share this with your friends. Let them hear what's going on and see what's going on. Give them this information so that they can be aware. And if you have any questions, comment below. But hit the follow button, the like button on this specific video, and share it with your friends. We need to have this discussion, folks, and then we got to figure out what are the steps we're going to take from here to win this battle. Thanks for your time tonight. I hope you have a great evening and a wonderful Labor Day weekend. Enjoy yourself. Keep in touch with us, and look forward to talking to you again soon.